I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the new Mercedes-Benz A250e plug-in hybrid. And this car is important for a few reasons. Firstly, it allows Mercedes-Benz customers to jump into electrification for way less money than buying this brand's EQC fully electric SUV. Now, obviously this thing still has a combustion engine. It's not a full battery electric vehicle, but it does have a usable range from its plug-in electric motor. 60 kilometers of range, plus because this is a plug-in hybrid that pairs a 1.3 litre petrol engine with a decently beefy electric motor, combined outputs are really decent. 160 kilowatts of power and 450 newton meters of torque mean this thing actually offers a pretty decent turn of speed, and you can get into it for under $70,000. So to me, that all sounds interesting, but we need to work out A, whether this thing lives up to the Benz name in terms of how good the interior is, B, how it drives, and C, how usable is it really in terms of being perhaps your first electrified car. A bit of a hint though, it's pretty usable because in a rare instance for a plug-in hybrid, this one actually supports DC fast charging to 22 kilowatt hours, which is really quite useful. Next up, let's check out the interior. So what's the A250e like on the inside? Because this car has a bit of a hard job. The elephant in the room is that at about 69 grand drive away, you're actually not that far off a Tesla Model 3, of course, a fully electric vehicle in terms of price. That's going to cost you around 10 grand more for a reasonably Spartan Model 3. Now, this is a Mercedes-Benz. Some would argue that there's additional brand image there for this car. And of course, being a plug-in hybrid, you have the benefit of easy range from the combustion engine that can be filled up in just a couple of minutes, as opposed to an EV, which is going to take 15-20 minutes plus, even for the really fast charging ones in an ideal environment. So you can let me know down below in the comments how you're thinking about that kind of value proposition. I'll leave the philosophizing up to you guys. For me, does this feel like a 69 grand A-Class? Well, perhaps not quite 69 grand, but it doesn't feel too far off. The new A-Class has a really nice interior, pretty much no matter which model you go for, and that applies to the A250e. Now, there are a couple of options that you might want to tick if you want to bring this car up to the standard of kind of as good as it can be. This one is actually almost devoid of options. So for example, these Artico seats, so not leather, fake leather, they're comfortable, they're supple, the material feels pretty convincing, but they aren't leather and they don't have electric adjustment. So we only have manual adjustment here for both of the seats, electric lumbar though, but we have no heated seats or cooled seats. You can add stuff like that in with option packages. Thankfully though, Mercedes-Benz has made the top tier infotainment pack standard in Australia. So we have twin large widescreens up here. This one controls your navigation, multimedia, telephone, whereas the front one is mainly based around driver information, but they're hugely customizable. They're controlled with trackpads here on the wheel, one for each screen. There is a bit of a learning curve to this system, but it's well worth taking the time to learn it because it's a really in-depth bit of software and very powerful in what it's able to do. We also have a trackpad down here between the seats. That works well on the move, I find. Not quite as well as the old rotary dials, however. But where Mercedes have made a huge step up in the new A-Class is in terms of interior quality. The old one was full of plastic. The new one has stepped up the perception a lot. Much nicer materials on the doors and on the dash, and this is at least the 5th A-Class I've driven now from the new generation, and quality on the road is really good. No more rattles or creaks coming from an A-Class, which is really nice. Similarly, the steering wheel here, base wheel for an A-Class, you know, it's nice, it's leather wrapped, it's a circle, which I know a lot of people prefer. And in terms of practicality, it's pretty good. We've got 2 cup holders here, wireless charging, USB-C ports only in this car, and a little bin here between the seats, plus a big door bin. So lots to like. Also, you can choose other colors and trims inside here. You don't have to go all black. This one's just in a classic silver over black configuration. So that's up front. Let's have a look at the back seat. Now, our expectations aren't too high. This is only an A-Class. You know, it's Mercedes-Benz's smallest vehicle, and I don't think many people are going to be putting tall teenagers in the back of one all that often. But if you do have to, it's actually not that bad. I'm 6 foot, headroom's fine for me. We don't have a sunroof in this car. That would hurt if we had one, but I think I'd still fit. Legroom, I've got another inch, and toe room is acceptable. Now the bench itself is pretty low, so I wouldn't want to do a road trip in the back of an A-Class, but as occasional transport, it's perfectly workable. What else have we got back here? Well, those soft materials do extend to the back door. That's more than we can say for something like a Volkswagen Golf, for example. We have a flip down armrest here with 2 cup holders, always quite a nice luxury to have, but disappointingly for a car that's almost $70,000 on the road, no air vents in the second row. We do have a flip down panel with 2 more USB-C ports. Perhaps you can get like USB-C powered fans. Maybe that's what you're expected to do here. I don't know, that was a joke. But all I'm saying is, as an occasional backseat, you know, it's perfectly workable. What about boot space? We need to have a look at that because the battery and motor actually takes up some of it. Here around the back of the A250e, it's all pretty ordinary A-Class. We do have an E badge here, which is the only thing that's going to signify from the back that you are in the electrified one. Of course, we have a hybrid tag there on this Victoria number plate. But the other difference is a bit less cargo space. Manual tailgate, that's fine. As you can see, we've got a lot of stuff in here, so it's not like drastic or anything, but we have 310 litres of space in the back of the A-Class. So that's down a little bit, just over 10% compared to the non-electrified A-Class. And for reference, a car like a Volkswagen Golf has 380 litres of space, so it's not terrible. The floor is a little higher. We don't have a spare in this car because the battery takes up the space where all of those sorts of gubbins would really be sort of dug into. But as an in-town runabout, as a car that you'll stick around the suburbs in or for your commute, it really does make a lot of sense. Plus there isn't a huge lip here. There is a bit of storage for your cables included in terms of a little bag and a nice substantial cargo cover as well. Now, if you do need a bit more space, you can get the A250e in the A-Class sedan format, which sees the boot capacity rise to 355 litres, but of course you don't have the practicality of the extended sort of wagon body that you get in a hatchback. So what's the plug-in A-Class like to drive? Well, this is actually quite a charming small car to drive, and it's significantly better than the other versions of the A-Class that solely run on the 1.3 litre turbocharged 4-cylinder engine. So that's the A180 and the A200. This car also uses that engine, but because it has the benefit of the electric motor and battery, it's a lot more refined. You need to use that engine a lot less. And when you are driving this car in a traditional kind of hybrid sense, it just has a lot more torque to tap into, so it doesn't seem as breathless, or it doesn't have to work as hard, nor does it stress the gearbox as much. And it's actually a different gearbox in the hybrid compared to the A180 and the A200. Now, Mercedes badges this an A250e because it's seen as more or less on par with the A250 combustion version, which makes 165 kilowatts of power and 350 Newton meters of torque. Here in the A250e, the combined power figure is 160 kilowatts of power and 450 Newton meters of torque. That's when you've got a nicely juiced battery and you're tapping into the throttle in a big way, and it's using both the 1.3 litre engine and the electric motor and battery in hybrid at the same time. And you know, there are occasions where you can do that. If you put the car into sport mode and you accelerate away from the lights, this is a pretty fast car. However, I don't tend to think that's the way most people really use a plug-in hybrid. For me, the beauty of a car like this is that for your commute during the week, you can run it on electric only power. And that's especially the case because the battery in this vehicle is relatively generous for a small plug-in hybrid. And then on the weekend, if you want to take a trip out in the country, you can run it in battery save or even without any juice in the battery, and you can use the traditional petrol engine. And of course, your range with the petrol engine is, you know, more or less unlimited because it's, you know, it's so easy to find petrol stations and it only takes a couple of minutes to fill up a petrol car. That being said, there are complications to all of that, but most of them work out in the A250e's favor. The first one is charging it with electricity to run during the week in the scenario that I've just described. Out of the box, this car has an AC charger, and you'll more or less be plugging it in overnight at home to get the 60 kilometers of official range. About 50 kilometers is this car's real range. Now, you can upgrade the car for $1,500 to the DC charging package, and that is something that I absolutely would do. First of all, it doubles the theoretical speed of the AC charging, So you can put in a 3-phase wall box at home, and that will see the charging time at home come down substantially to about an hour and a half. So you could really do that between meetings or after dropping the kids off at school or something like that. And that's pretty convenient. But what's really convenient is using 22 kilowatt DC fast charging. That's the maximum charging speed. The DC fast charger near our office, they have a 50 kilowatt and two 350 kilowatts. So just using the 50 kilowatt, you can recharge this car's sort of 10.9 kilowatt hour usable battery in about 20 minutes, 25 minutes. And that is no time at all to put 60 Ks back into the car, and then you're off on your way again, zero tailpipe emissions. The good thing is that the A250e is really viable on electric power alone. The motor produces 75 kilowatts of power and 300 Newton meters of torque by itself. 75 kilowatts is reasonably modest, but you know, there are entry-level Volkswagen Polos and Golfs that make that amount of power, but they certainly don't make 300 Newton meters, and that's the figure that really matters when you're accelerating away from the lights, which is something you do a lot in town. And I've driven this car relatively athletically in electric-only mode, and it's never decided that it needs to bring in the petrol engine. Even in just comfort mode, which is what this car starts in by default, it's never kicked the engine on for me. The 300 Newton meters has been enough, and I think that is really quite impressive. Now, when you are using it with the petrol engine, it's a little rougher. That 1.3 litre unit co-developed with Renault, not one of my favourite engines, so I quite like the fact you don't need to use it very much, but it's perfectly passable. Now, the ride and handling is an interesting one. The ride is more like an A180 or an A200 than an A250 because we only have a torsion beam rear suspension here, and that actually makes the A250e a bit crashy over bumps. Just at the rear end though, the front suspension on the A-Class is pretty good. The rear suspension with the torsion beam is just not very sophisticated. The torsion beam isn't the problem. Cars like the Peugeot 308 get on fine with a torsion beam, but usually in cars like this, where the torsion beam is the entry-level suspension and then the multi-link suspension is on the up-spec cars, in this case the all-wheel drive A-Classes have multi-link IRS. In those circumstances, the torsion beam is the porker, and that's absolutely the case here. Sadly, it doesn't quite ride like a Mercedes-Benz should, and that's really the only thing that would hold me back on saying an A250e is a really great Mercedes-Benz, because in all other ways, this feels like a luxurious little car. Great interior, the steering's pretty nice, pretty quick, quite light, very Mercedes-esque, the steering, but the handling is sporty, athletic, grippy, agile, fun to drive. This platform is designed to accommodate the battery from the start. It's down the back, down low. It actually gives this car a nice center of gravity, low down, and it shifts more of the weight to the rear, so it's actually more balanced than the petrol-engined A-Classes from a weight distribution point of view. So it's actually pretty well done. Just that torsion bar ride is a bit of an issue. In terms of safety features, it's a bit of a mixed bag. We don't have adaptive cruise control, for example, as standard. You can option that sort of thing in. We do have lane keep assist though, which is good. We've got blind spot monitoring. We've got a decent reversing camera, but there are lots of options you can choose for the A-Class to make this car more or less as luxurious and sophisticated as you would like. So that's a detailed look at the new Mercedes-Benz A250e plug-in hybrid. Honestly, I reckon this is a really good step for the A-Class. A car like this makes a lot of sense with electrification. I reckon the forthcoming EQA, which will be a full electric kind of iteration of the A-Class, should be really exciting, but it will also probably be quite expensive. So as a middle ground, the A250e under 70 grand, drive away here in Australia makes a lot of sense. Very likable car, good amount of range, drives pretty well as we found out. So to me, you know, I think it's worth considering if you were already going to be buying quite a nice A-Class instead and you want to dip your toe into electrification. But I'm keen to know your thoughts. Does the value proposition here stack up? Let me know down below. Or are you looking at a plug-in hybrid kind of close to that 50 grand level, something like a Hyundai Ioniq? Of course, this does wear the 3-pointed star, so it costs more. And while you're down there, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.